Hello. Today I want to share the story of the Long March with you. And of course, I'm talking about the Mao Zedong in the Long March of the Red Army. Primarily, this video will be based on two books, Red Star Above China, one of the books that helped create this myth of the Long March. And I'll explain what do I mean when I say myth, what myths am I talking about exactly, and on the Jung Chang's book, Mao the Unknown Story, that aims to deconstruct myths about the Long March that still exists today, especially in China, but in many other um, countries as well. So, the story of the Long March can be described essentially as the Lord of the Rings of the Chinese Communist Party. This epic tale of this long journey, and we are talking about the length of about 10,000 kilometers. That's the length that's actually twice time the width of the United States of America. That's quite a lot, and you can see the journey here on this map. But okay, let me start by explaining the geopolitical background behind the Long March. And when you hear the geopolitical background, you'll realize that the story is more like Game of Thrones and less like Lord of the Rings. So what I need to mention is what was the goal of the Chinese nationalist? What was the Chiang Kai-shek's goal? So his primary goal was not to destroy the Chinese communists completely. He just wanted to greatly weaken them and relocate them into this new place, the northern Shaanxi province, more specifically into the Great Yellow Plateaus, or the Great Yellow Plains that were scarcely populated. And there he thought the Chinese communists wouldn't be that much of a threat because they would lack the peasants uh, to recruit in the Red Army, and they would be still far away from the or far enough at least from the Soviet Union, and so the Soviets wouldn't be able to supply them with munition, tanks, aircrafts, vehicles, gasoline, and other stuff. And so what needs to be mentioned is that the communists for a long time actually wanted to move closer to the Soviet Union, and the Long March was actually something that forced them to do something they were planning to do for a long time. But of course, Chang planned on stopping them before they ultimately reached the the border with Mongolia or with the Xinjiang province, where there are Muslims today getting killed. But okay, let me explain the two reasons why Chang actually never aimed to destroy the entire communist army were reason number one. Stalin actually held his son Chiang Ching-kuo as a hostage. His son, Chiang Kai-shek's son, was taken by a Soviet spy to the Soviet Union to study college. And at one point, Chiang Kai-shek actually realized that his son has been taken as a hostage by Stalin. And when he asked Stalin to return his son to him, Stalin replied, "Your son wishes not to return." And Chiang realized that the Soviets are actually, holding his son, and he realized that if he annihilates the entire Red Army, that his son might get killed. And on the other hand, Mao's three sons were also being held captive by Stalin. But Mao, according to Jung Chang, had an advantage, and that is he didn't ultimately care that much about his sons and his family. Maybe he didn't care that much because Mao had more sons and Chiang Kai-shek only had one son. But Mao, um, also, if we are to believe Jung Chang, didn't care that much about his wives either. when his first wife was killed by the White armies, just for the crime of being his wife, Mao didn't show signs of sadness, and by then he already had a secret second wife. But okay, Chang also had a secret reason. Well, this reason is also secret, but a second secret reason. He wanted to use the Chinese communists as a tool in order to weaken the warlords, because Chang wasn't only at war with the communists, he was also at war with the warlords, and he primarily wanted to use them in order to weaken the Guizhou warlord and the Sichuan warlord. And Sichuan was one of the most prosperous regions in China. And Chang reasoned that as the communists would start entering the Guizhou region in China, that the warlords would ask him for protection because they would prefer him to the communists that didn't really treat rich people and especially warlords kindly. And his plan actually did work well, at least partially. You'll see what happens in the end. So this brilliant plan actually didn't go quite as he planned, because, to quote one great historian, stuff happens. In history, stuff just happens, and sometimes nobody can predict what will happen. Unexpected things happen. And yeah, so Chang actually wanted to use the communists in order to capture Sichuan and the Guizhou region in China, as you can see here. And once Mao reached the Guizhou region, he at first refused to enter the Sichuan region, and that was very weird because most people, including Chiang Kai-shek and most of his comrades, also expected Mao to enter the Sichuan region because there was already a pretty powerful communist presence in Sichuan, specifically in northern Sichuan, and communists there were led by this guy, Chang Ku-tao. And Chang Ku-tao was a Mao-like figure, a very Machiavellian and cruel Chinese communist that led somewhere around 80,000 men, and he also saw himself as the leader of the entire China. And Mao Zedong was afraid of uniting his army with Chang Ku-tao's army, because Chang Ku-tao's army was bigger, and he was afraid that Chang Ku-tao might purge him in the same way that Mao purged many others. And Chang Ku-tao was also famous for purging people, because he was afraid that somebody might take power from him. And so for a while, Mao, from the perspective of Chiang Kai-shek and his comrades, acts like a crazy person. He and the Red Army just keep running in circles in the Guizhou region, and they refuse to enter the Sichuan region. And Yung Chang, the author of the book, actually explained to us that thousands of communists die because Mao is afraid that he will be purged by this guy, his fellow communist. And that's actually something that's not taught in China. And after thousands die needlessly, primarily because either because of malaria, because they are just tired from walking and exhaustion, or because they died fighting the nationalists and their planes that could just gun them down from the skies. And at this point, Mao's second wife almost dies. She is wounded, but she miraculously manages to survive, and she is forced to leave her baby to the peasant villagers near the Sichuan region. And she was later obsessed with finding that baby, but she never found out whether or not the baby actually survived. And Mao allegedly didn't care that much about the baby. Here you can see the Sichuan region, the mountainous region of Sichuan. And Sichuan is also famous for pandas, and here You can see Sichuan for pandas and for spicy food and giant Buddha statues. And Sichuan is also one of the most prosperous regions in China, which is why Chiang Kai-shek wanted to capture the region and use Mao actually as a tool in his brilliant plan to expand his rule and also preserve his son. Uh, and one of the things that I do believe did happen, because Jung Chang never deconstructs the story of this happening, and Edgar Snow brings us the story of the Lolo people and their encounter with the communists, and this truly is something that belongs in Lord of the Rings or in a epic movie. The Chinese, they enter the just before they leave the Sichuan region, they are forced to cross through the land of the Lolo people, or of the Yi people, and the Yi people essentially suffered the same fate as the American Indians. They were colonized by the Qin, and the Han people just kept taking their land and forcing them to live in a smaller and smaller enclave. And as the communists were passing through their lands, they sent communist commanders to establish peace with the Lolo people, and they explained to the Lolo people, "We are not like the warlords that take your land and see you as lesser humans. We are not ethno-nationalists. We are communists, and communists believe that all people are equal." And that's when many hundreds of Lola people actually join the communists, because they are touched by this message of equality and universal brotherhood, and they actually believe that that part happened. But what didn't happen is the famous story of the Tet river, or it is today called the Dadu river. So here you can see posters in Chinese propaganda about this heroic crossing over the Dadu river. There was this small bridge that's also a cultural monument in China, and Mao found himself in a situation where the only way for the Red Army to cross the bridge was, yeah, to just cross it with troops in order to get to the other side. And the problem is the other side was controlled by the warlords that were mostly anti-communist. And what allegedly happens, Mao tells Edgar Snow this story. He sends 30 volunteers to capture the bridge, and they heroically somehow manage to surprise the enemy with their crazy courage and bravery, and they capture the bridge while the enemy is shooting at them and even burning parts of the bridge. As you can see in this picture, they are forced to just to use their hands and to grab the chains in order not to fall off. But what actually Jung Chang tells us is kind of funny. And here you can see that this myth of the bridge over the Dadu River is still strong in China, which is why these Chinese women are taking pictures on this bridge. Well, what allegedly happens, according to Jung Chang, and he was actually told this by an senior communist officer. He told him, well, actually nobody was guarding the bridge. The warlords were too busy fighting each other, and we just crossed the bridge. And we just made this story up because that bridge is an epic site and an important part of Chinese history. Um, that bridge was also near the Taiping Rebellion, near the place where the Taiping Rebellion was crushed, which is why the communists saw the historical significance of the region and of the bridge itself, because the bridge itself is a historical monument, and they decided to create the story of the heroic crossing of the bridge, and uh, allegedly 22 of the volunteers that survived get the Golden Star, which is the highest honor in the Chinese Communist Party, in the Red Army, to be more precise. But yeah, according to Yung Chang, allegedly nobody died except for 3 people and 1 horse. And how did they die? Well, the story is actually quite embarrassing if you take it into account that they were just crossing the empty bridge. They were fighting nobody. Then how the hell did 3 people die? Well, since the bridge was pretty old and Mao ordered them to repair the bridge, 3 guys just fell from the bridge, which is, yeah, pretty embarrassing. The parts of the bridge collapsed and 3 guys just died from nothing, essentially. And other people died because of the cold winds in the Tibet regions of China, and they were forced to leave their clothes in the subtropical regions of China that were hot, and then they suddenly found themselves in the cold regions where many died from sickness and lung disease. And finally, in the Tibetan regions, Mao unites with Chiang Kuo-tao, but then he actually manages to convince him to follow Mao's cunning plan to take power. Mao then suddenly, one night, without telling anybody, decides to march through the hardest possible terrain in order to get to the Soviets, to the northern Shaanxi region. And then later he tells his nemesis, Chiang Kuo-tao, that he also needs to cross through the swamplands because that's what Stalin ordered. And Mao embarks on this crazy journey through the swamplands in order to essentially mess with his nemesis, Chiang Kuo-tao, and thousands of communists actually die in the swamplands from mud and diarrhea and malaria, and some are just bit by snakes, and some just fell into the mud and die. And yeah, that's also something not often discussed in the history of Chinese communism. But ultimately, Chiang Kuo-tao refuses to follow Mao, and that's why Mao is able to become more powerful than him, and even purge him in the end, and accuse him of disobedience because he refused to follow orders, crazy orders, but they were still orders, and Mao had the majority of the secretariat on his side, so he was able to give orders. And finally, Mao reaches the Yellow Earth plateaus, and they are truly a bizarre geographical phenomenon, as you can see. And Mao tries to cross the Yellow River in order to get connected with the Soviets, but he fails. And allegedly, in that attempt, a Chinese communist hero, Liu Chitan, the Chinese Robin Hood that stole from the rich and gave to the poor, dies. But Yung Chang tells us that actually the guy is killed by Mao Zedong because Mao was afraid that Liu Chitan maybe is too powerful and too popular with the peasants, and that he will take power from Mao Zedong. And what happens? Well, Mao is forced to settle in northern Shaanxi, but then something unexpected happens. The Kuomintang troops themselves rebel against their leader, Chiang Kai-shek, and actually force him to make peace with the communists. And also, Chiang Kai-shek is also forced by Stalin, and Stalin promises him to give him his son back if he makes peace with the communists. And Chiang actually accepts this, and he gives communists this prosperous region of Yunnan, and that makes Mao extremely powerful because Yunnan has oil fields and a lot of people in it, and Chiang also supplies them with Soviet weapons that Mao craved for, and that were the purpose of the entire Long March. But he gets his son in return, and yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you in this epic story about the truth of the long march of Mao Zedong.